think we have two pictures here that are part of a particular kind of blossoming moment of modernity. These are both, in a certain sense, hinge pictures. Nobody knew what was coming, but everybody knew something was. And things we think of as being very much part of the post-World War I aesthetic were already very much present in poetry and in painting immediately preceding the Great War. This De Chirico is very much about that kind of premonition. One of the things that I've always found moving about De Chirico is that though we talk about the pictures correctly in terms of disquiet and melancholy, they're hugely attractive pictures at the same time, and there's no one like him. The Man Ray, I think, fascinates us in many ways, but not least because there's something that's premonitory in its own way of the declarative strain in American painting. Man Ray is simultaneously a European figure and an American figure, but in so many ways he seems more American than European. And it makes us think again about the Great War. Americans experienced it very differently. They experienced it in the manner of Scott Fitzgerald as something that was about America coming of age. And though I would hardly infuse Man Ray's picture with that full knowledge, I do think there's a sense of something that is declamatory, assertive, self-confident in a way that very few European painters of that time, I think, would have achieved. The De Chirico is one of the Ariadne series that he produced around this time, around 1913. And we see Ariadne stretched out there in the form of Hellenistic sculpture. The myth of Ariadne is one of the very richest in Greek mythology, but it's one that had a particular intensity for modern people. Nietzsche, for instance, was obsessed with the myth of Ariadne. It's a myth of deliverance of a kind. Ariadne, remember, helps Theseus to fight the Minotaur, and then he escapes with her from the labyrinth and immediately abandons her on the island of Naxos. And in fact, in the De Chirico, we can actually just see Theseus's ship slipping away in the background. So that's very much all implanted in this picture, but this is an Ariadne who lives in every sense in the modern world, in a world of industrial chimneys, of railroads, of long city shadows. And it's exactly that confrontation that I think makes this picture not only so powerful, but so prescient of so many things that would happen in 20th century art. Among all the many tentacles that this picture puts forward into art history, the one that leads to Edward Hopper and to the American painting of loneliness and the alienated world is, I think, very present. But also, it is a place where symbolism begins to become surrealism. The De Chirico metaphysical pictures live very much in the world of the surrealist dream. And there's clearly something about that language of shadows and abandoned piazzas and Roman arcades that appealed to De Chirico, as I think it appeals to many of us. One of the things that's so fascinating about Man Ray is he goes on to become a full-fledged and hugely significant surrealist. He's one of the great authors of not only iconic surrealist images, but also of surrealist objects of the first order. And so when you look at this picture, you inevitably see intimations of that form of surrealism leaping out, in his case, not so much from symbolism, but out of cubism and out of Dada. The Armory Show of 1913 is famously the great pivot point in modern American painting. It's the moment when European avant-garde painting, Cubism in particular, and also Duchamp and so many other things that descend from it, come into New York and change everything in their wake. Where in Europe, Cubist painting and its offshoots were still seen as a fundamental challenge to the art establishment, the reception in America was in some ways much more positive. It was seen as progressive, liberating, in tune with American values of change and embrace of the future, along with all of the lessons that he's absorbed, obviously, from looking at the Cubist work in the Armory Show. This Man Ray has a lot of Stuart Davis about it, that kind of jaunty, syncopated proto-pop art that's in dialogue with shop windows and billboards and posters. When we think about synthetic cubism in France, we're thinking about easel-sized pictures. And the translation of that into window-sized pictures is obviously part of what happens in America. We have a natural tendency towards gigantism. Its ultimate expression is in New York Harbor and South Dakota, but we like big things. Working big was for American artists in lots of ways a way of working intimately. It seems like a contradiction, but American spaces are bigger than European spaces. And if you want to make an intimate statement in America, it's got to be big enough to carry. But I think that the kind of exclamatory scale is very much about this appropriation of Cubist syntax into a much more affirmative, jazz-based American language of art. One of the great questions that I think anybody who loves modern art has to ask themselves over and over again is, are the energies that are here in forms that are disquieting, creative, visionary, are they still part of our world now? Some people answer, no, they're not part of our world now. That chapter is concluded. And then there are those of us who think those vibrations, that vision, is still very much part of our life now. And I have to say for myself, looking at these two pictures, I come down very much on the side of the continuous. These are both pictures that come from a very disturbing time in modern history, right before and right during the First World War. I think that the energies that continue to radiate out are, on the whole, positive, generative, available.